Good morning, good evening, as the case may be, and thank you for joining us this morning on this conference call on the new normal for as we go through supply chains in a post-COVID world. We're going to be talking about the case for planning, preparedness, and proactive action. Supply chain risk management has definitely taken center stage in the aftermath of since January, I would say. We welcome you for joining us today. I am Bindia Vakil. I'm the CEO and founder of Resolink, and joining me on this call this morning is Shazib Khan. Shazib has been with Resolink, I think, going on 5 years now, and was instrumental in developing our Event Watch program, and is now running Event Watch and in product management. Shazib, welcome, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Bindia. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening.
Okay, great. So folks, today what we will talk about is the year that we have had since January, what we have seen in terms of disruptions. We have seen cases come and go in different regions, and certainly now we're seeing, since June, we have been tracking the second wave emerging in many countries around the world that had successfully managed to reduce case counts and at least start achieving some semblance of normal. So we'll see what is currently going on, the types of restrictions, lockdowns, etc. That we are seeing in different parts of the world. Shazib with Event Watch manages this on a day-to-day basis, so he will take the lead on talking about this. And then I'll talk more about what companies are doing, how are they monitoring, collaborating with suppliers, working with mapping and other types of data in their supply chain to get a handle on the situation. And then looking forward, we will talk about the business case for supply chain risk management. We do see that COVID has definitely been very disruptive, but we'll share with you how supply chains can be continuously disrupted. And so we have some interesting insights for you on what other things that are happening in the supply chain that experts are dealing with as we speak. So that's kind of the plan for our session today. Just in terms of quick logistics, you should see a Q&A bar. You should be able to type in questions in there, and we will do our best to answer them as we go along. Either Shazib or myself, we will be monitoring the questions that come in, and we will try to answer as appropriate within the session itself rather than wait until the end. So feel free to post your questions at any time. Slides and recording will be available through the Resolink website, and feel free to contact us if you're interested in receiving either. Great. So it has been a crazy, unprecedented year for supply chain practitioners. I will tell you, I have been in supply chain for more than 20 years and in supply chain risk for pretty much all of those 20 years. And COVID really represented for a lot of us every disruption all happening all together within a 3-month period. We saw everything from demand drop to factories disrupted, labor disrupted, transportation disrupted, shortages, lines down, customer allocations, supplier allocations, all of that. Some sectors definitely more impacted compared to others. And you can also see that wave 1 was hugely disruptive compared to wave 2 so far. Certain industries saw tremendous disruption. There were some industries where we saw very different types of disruptions, like automotive, aerospace. We saw a huge demand drop. and of course supply chain disruptions as well. But then in the healthcare, medical device, life science, pharma industries, we saw demand was actually quite robust, and in certain cases we were running out of critical materials, like everything we needed for testing our population, everything we needed for treating people, PPE to take care of people, our staff and medical frontline personnel, as well as the PPE needed to operate factories. I mean, we had people buying PPE that had never purchased PPE before so that they could keep their essential business functional. So it has been a really unprecedented type of a year. Shazib, any insight to share on this wave one versus wave two, what you're seeing in Event Watch?
Yeah, the difference between wave one is that, we government and agencies were not sure what is essential, what is not. So the lockdowns, the nature of lockdowns and the nature of restrictions were different in wave one, where in wave two, you have a good understanding of what is essential. You're not completely shutting down businesses, but still restrictions. For example, you cannot have more than 50% workforce at a time. For example, you have to follow some specific government guidelines if you want to keep operating. Such kind of restrictions, they're not complete 100% lockdowns, but they are still disrupting Malaysia. Very interesting thing that they implemented is that you cannot hire a foreign worker, which is impacting the gloves and PPE industry, because Malaysia is one of the biggest supplier. So workforce capacities, guidelines that government provided, very tight guidelines if you want to keep operating, those kind of disruptions are still disrupting the supply chain.
Thank you, Shaz. So as you saw, as Shazib mentioned, the type of disruptions that we saw between January through April for COVID were intense, and a lot of companies, very broadly speaking, came out in public domain and confirmed that they were impacted. We definitely saw that peak at the end of April, and then since May, we're seeing things largely resume. Obviously, we're not always 100% up and running, and as Shazib said, sporadically we will see that even essential businesses. We certainly saw that here in the United States. There was a lot of news about companies who were reopening, having to go back and shut down 2 or 3 weeks later for another 2 weeks because they found a surge in cases among the workers. So we did see those types of sporadic disruptions happen in May, June, July, and August. We continue to see that. As Shazib said, in August, we're also seeing virus outbreak in certain parts of the world. So as you can see, lockdowns are starting to get reimposed in certain parts of different. What we're seeing is a little bit different, is that we're seeing a little more narrower lockdown, meaning the whole is not getting locked down. I think a little more towns or cities or industrial estates are going through lockdown. Shazib, any specific thing to share on that?
Yeah, so some of the smaller countries, especially Asian countries that are small countries but important for manufacturing activities, they are actually more aggressive. Even 10 new cases can lead to a city getting shut down. So I think we should keep a very close eye on those countries like Vietnam, Malaysia. These countries are very aggressive as compared to maybe America, North American, European countries in implementing these restrictions and locking down things. For example, just 10 new cases in Vietnam shut down an entire city. Of course, the definition of shutting down has changed now. It's not the same shutdown that we saw between January and May, but still, it can lead to a lot of disruptions.
Absolutely. And I think what we see companies doing as we are going through this is that a lot of our customers are and we'll talk about that in the upcoming slides as well, is they're contacting suppliers proactively, because a lot of Reslink customers know which suppliers are in which country, have factories or subcontractors in those regions, particularly countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines. These countries are very critical for the high tech industry supply chain, certainly. And so knowing which suppliers are in what area is absolutely critical in order to work with the supplier, collaborate with them, ensure that they have necessary PPEs and any cleaning equipment, etc., to help them stay functional. So collaboration has become very critical in keeping ahead of these movements as we speak. Um,
And
so
just to
yeah, go
just
ahead.
to add on to what Bindya said, we from Reslink Event Watch side, we have made some changes to our criteria of the COVID coverage as well. In wave two, what we are doing is, we are creating war rooms proactively. As soon we see some kind of panic or spike in a region, as soon we see signs of a lockdown coming, we start creating war rooms for the customers to start collaborating with suppliers. Even before a lockdown, in some cases, we are creating war rooms 3-4 days before the lockdown is actually announced.
Great. So I think as we saw, this year, industry impact has been, first of all, I want to say that Reslink's been monitoring supply chain disruptions for over 10 years now. And we have been monitoring many, many different types of disruptions. And one of the things that we do is we mark and research events and mark them as severe. After a very long time, it was, in fact, COVID has been only the third time that we've had to mark a disruption severe. And this slide kind of shows why. We see tremendous production disrupted, factory shutdowns. We see layoffs, profit warnings, bankruptcies, force majeure types of disruptions. By industry, it really, we see a lot of automotive industry disruptions. Also, travel restrictions are continuously growing and getting put in place between countries, between towns and states as well in different parts of the country. And as Shazib said, different countries have put a moratorium on, for example, foreign workers, etc. Shazib, anything to add on this one before we go into
Yeah, we can go to next slide.
Yeah. Go ahead, Shaz. Why don't you continue?
Yes, so I was actually looking forward to this slide because a lot of us are very much consumed by COVID, but it doesn't mean that other disruptions, regular disruptions that we normally get have stopped. We are still getting, naturally caused disruptions like flooding events. Storms are still developing. Next month is going to be the busiest month in terms of hurricanes. Then what happened in Beirut? Exactly the same thing happened in Tianjin. I know the importance of the region is different, but we have 152 supplier sites in Beirut. So the reason we included this slide is because we want you to keep your eyes on these regular disruptions as well as COVID. I know Michigan dam flooding caused a lot of disruptions. We received a lot of confirmations from suppliers that they are impacted. China flooding, we received a lot of confirmations for China flooding that sites are impacted. Suppliers have been confirming. And other than that, I was looking into past 3 months data. Factory fire is still the most common event type other than COVID. A non-COVID event type, factory fire is still the most common. So we have to keep an eye on that as well. We have to keep collaborating with the suppliers. This is our weekly digest from the last week only. And you will see that factory fire, there's a long list of fires. Then you see factory disruptions where we cover events like factory got evacuated, they had to shut down for some reason. And these are all known COVID disruptions, and still there's a long list of just site-specific events, factory fires, factory disruptions, labor disruptions. So we have to keep an eye on these as well. They may be smaller events, but can be disruptive.
Exactly. So I think and as you know, someone who has been in procurement for many years, I will tell you that a lot of times what we find is that companies who are not aware, think of this as your morning news, you know, professional supply chain related news update. Obviously, when Reslink alerts our customers, we won't send a factory fire at a tire factory event to someone who is in the pharma industry. So we definitely, it's not like these are all disruptive for you as an individual working in a certain space or certain type of industry or category. But just to keep an eye on the fact that here are all the different things that are going on in 1 week alone. And in my experience, what I always find is that, you know, there are slow moving train wrecks, and then there are the big catastrophic things that you see and hear in the news. As a supply chain person, you have to deal with both. Why is something like a business sale or spin-off important? Well, it's important because it could lead to a disruption in 3 to 6 months, because the new acquiring company might decide to discontinue a product line that was really important for you. And so what we do, in my experience, I have found that when you have products that are very high revenue impact to your business, these are suppliers who make things that may not be expensive, you know, but they may be custom, semi-custom, or sole sourced or single source types of products. It's really important to keep an eye on what's happening with those companies. Not everything is a disruption today. Many things are early warnings to a disruption that might be happening in the next few months. And Resilink is very unique in that we not only have all of this data, but we're also able to be more predictive in how events that are happening over time can cause your price movements to go up or down, your lead times to get pushed out, or your purchase order deliveries from your supplier to get delayed. So these are some key things that, as supply chain experts, you really want to be more predictive on. And so having this type of a monitoring system connected to your operational data systems can help you be prepared ahead of time. Just
Yeah, one thing,
yeah, go ahead.
quick thing, Bindia, I want to highlight this event that happened at tier 3 supplier in Japan, a fiberglass supplier called Nitobo. We were actually very surprised with some of our customers' response to that event. Some of our customers responded to that event like a week after we notified the event, which tells us that yes, we are very much consumed by COVID, but there are still events happening. It was just a tier 3 supplier, but it disrupted a lot of companies, including a lot of resilient customers. So that's why it's very important that we keep our eyes open to such smaller events as well.
And you know what it is? It's funny you mentioned the tier 3 event, because in my career, I always saw those second and third tier events as being reported to me as, oh, you know what? We place a purchase order, the supplier cancels or says, I need more time and I can't deliver on the request date. Now, as a company using my ERP system, I place the order within my lead time window. And so when a supplier pushes out within lead time, I have no time to react to that. So having this news and being able to connect that tier 3 supplier to the appropriate tier 2s and tier 1s ahead of time gets you weeks of 2 to 3 months, in fact, early warning compared to operating within lead time. So yeah, thanks, Shaz, for pointing that one out. Super critical. As we look ahead, even as we talk to Gartner, there are really good reports actually that Gartner has put out. Supply Chain Dive covered this one, where more and more companies are now realizing the importance of being resilient and investing more in supply chain visibility and resilience. So let me talk about that for a few minutes, right? Because in the news, we hear a lot about this. Many companies are, suddenly JIT and lean have become sort of bad words, right? Or suddenly, and also the geopolitics are such at the moment. China is definitely not considered a favorable nation for U.S. companies. So many companies are looking at reshoring, nearshoring operations, and those types of conversations tied to resilience have come up more and more. Now, when you look at disruptions in that fashion and you say, okay, I'm going to invest in inventory or shelving lean, or maybe not being completely lean, but adding more inventory into my supply chain or doing things differently, you have to really analyze the cost implications of that type of a decision. To give you an example, setting up a factory in the US, let's take semiconductor, for example, that can be a 10 to $15 billion investment. In China, not to mention all the process and government clearances, environmental clearances, and all of those things that you have to go through in order to finalize a location, get all the clearances, and make sure you have sufficient skilled and unskilled labor force available. Not just today. See, today we're in a slightly extraordinary situation. We have to project what the labor force will be available 3 years from now, when that factory will be up and running. So we have seen nearshoring projects actually fail prior to February because we could not staff them with people, because unemployment was at a historic low. So the question is, how feasible is it? How expensive is it? What is the total landed cost? Where are our customers located? So I think there was some news a few weeks ago about Apple going to invest in China for the local demand, India for the local demand, etc. So I think having that kind of a localized strategy, we might see more companies go that route. Because at the end of the day, we don't nearshore everything because we don't sell everything here. Our suppliers are there, our customers are growing, our fastest growing markets might actually be in Asia. So for many companies, investing in resilience might mean complete redesign of their supply chain. The cost implications of nearshoring, as I said, could be billions of dollars. Ditching lean and GIT and going to a higher inventory approach can be hundreds of millions of dollars, because we have a warehouse space shortage in the US, right? So we have to invest in additional warehouse space, cash gets tied up in inventory, and then inventory itself has other challenges such as expiration, date code problems, and so on. So what we find is that risk management and visibility is one of those things that you can, and we certainly work with our customers very successfully, even pre-COVID, to help them be more resilient while being lean, while having a globally distributed footprint. So I think this is something really important I wanted to make sure we cover, that a lot of companies are looking at being resilient in 2 to 3 years, which is phenomenal. I think, how do we get to that optimal stage where we can successfully compete in the market while having an optimal supply chain? Personally speaking, I'm very excited because I feel like our generation is the generation that will design the supply chain of the future. So for those of you who love what you do, I think there's never been a better time to be in supply chain. So let's talk about, when it comes to proactive supply chain risk management, what is it that we mean? What do companies and customers actually do? So there are two elements to that. There's the reactive, when an event happens, how do you manage that event? How quickly do you detect it? How long does it take you to find answers as to whether or not this event affects your supplier's sites, products, or parts? How quickly are suppliers able to tell you that they're okay or they're impacted? And then how effective is your communication and collaboration? COVID presented a very interesting challenge if you think about it, because a lot of us in supply chain, we're used to sitting in a war room to manage the event response, but obviously we were all sitting at home due to COVID. So that was an interesting kind of, nuance that we had not anticipated. Many companies we know invested tens of millions of dollars investing in really state-of-the-art, EBCs, emergency rooms and briefing centers. So that's the reactive workflow. On the proactive side, I think you will hear a lot of people talking in the market right now about the need for mapping the supply chain. And Shazib gave a really good example about the third-tier fiberglass supplier who could impact you without realizing it, unless you have those interlinkages mapped out. I'll talk in a few minutes about the different types of mapping and why, what are the pros and cons of those. I think that's very educational for many of you who may be either starting your journey or contemplating how to move forward on that. But mapping is absolutely critical, particularly when you combine it with the detection and some supplier assessment and analysis. We at ResLink really prefer the revenue impact analytics methodology because that methodology helps you really prioritize. So if I were to go to my manager and say, hey, we spent 250,000 on this connector, and if I want to, and it's a sole source connector, and I want to spend about $400,000 or $500,000 to qualify another source, my manager might say, really, I could use 500,000 to do 10 other things. But if I tell them that this connector is a sole source part on a product that is $1 billion a year in revenue, the supplier has one site, there's no other location, it's a very custom part, now we're having a different conversation. So the game-changing piece of information that I just provided was revenue impact, which helps me then prioritize, make the business case for mitigation, and then take action. Right? So this, we believe, constitutes a comprehensive supply chain risk management methodology that really looks at proactively designing supply chain better, using data and information coming out from the outside in, from the suppliers themselves. Shazib, anything to add on the on this?
No, Binya, you've highlighted everything.
So let's talk about mapping, right? So there are a couple of types of mapping that we do for our customers. There is mapping that is based on publicly available information. There are many companies that promise this. There's no input required from suppliers. You would go web scrape all the suppliers' global site locations off their website. Maybe they've done some press releases, things like that. We call it ResLink research data. And it's available for tens of thousands of suppliers and their global locations and sub-tier suppliers from ResLink. The good news is no input needed from the supplier. The bad news is you might get a lot of noise. So, for example, and I always like to talk about some of the very well-known suppliers like 3M or Amphenol that are very prevalent across the world, and they may have sites in 20, 30 countries where they operate. So any event like an earthquake, hurricane, factory fire that might happen anywhere in the world might suddenly become an issue for you when your parts may not come from those sites, right? So it's really important to know that when you use systems, tools, or providers that are only giving you data from public domain, that it may generate some noise and unnecessary action during disruptions for you. So let's start with mapping then. When you go to mapping, you collect data from your suppliers. And there are really three things that you're collecting, right? You can do a very lightweight mapping initiative where you go to the supplier and just say, give me your sites only that you use for me. So in that 3M or Amphenol example, you would tell them, you know, I buy these 10 types of things from you. Tell me the 3 or 4 sites that make my stuff. You know, you may not map the parts to the sites, but just tell me what sites you use for my business. It's the least effort needed for the supplier and fastest to get done and very, very easy, especially with Resolink on our LinkedIn for supply chain platform, where if the suppliers already shared their global sites, they just have to approve your access to the 3 or 4 sites that they build, where they build your stuff. So very, very easy to do. Supplier sites and subtiers is the next level, particularly in that fire example Shazib was giving, the fiberglass example, where knowing who the supplier sites, where the supplier sites are, who owns those sites, is it owned by the supplier or the subcontractor, and then knowing what sub-tier suppliers and sites they use, right? So it's a network connection and a global site location of the sub-tiers. And in particular, what we see is our customers will really ask the supplier to limit sub-tier information to things that are custom, semi-custom, single source, sole source, difficult to replace. And then the third is the supplier side, part side, and sub-tier. And I'll show you an example of part side and how it really adds a tremendous amount of value. I will say it is more work for the supplier to provide part site mapping information. And before I go into that, I'll tell you what part site mapping is. You might have a supplier that you buy 20 parts from them. And the supplier might have 80 factories worldwide. What you want is the supplier say, this factory builds these parts, this factory builds these parts, this factory builds these parts, right? So that's part to site mapping. And that's valuable because when there's something like a factory fire, without going to the supplier, you immediately know which 3 parts come from the factory that had a fire. Within seconds, you can get that information. Suppliers do have to go part by part and put this information in. Again, this is one of the things why Resolink is very successful at getting this information, is that we built that LinkedIn for supply chain type of platform. So if the supplier makes off-the-shelf type standardized components and their part numbers are pretty well known and standard part numbers are used, then they can just share their data with new customers. They don't have to part by part, customer by customer input this data. And so it streamlines the supplier effort quite a bit. Now, how this plays out, this is one example of how the whole workflow plays out during the reactive workflow during an event, a live event. On mobile itself, so that wherever your people are, your experts are on their mobile app, they would get an alert, something has happened. They can read the news about what is being reported. And then as you can see right in the war room itself, you can see how many supplier sites, products, and parts are in the geofenced area. Now, ResLink, when we do this alert, we actually geofence the region for our customers, and they can easily see right away, this is a $479 million potential impact. 3 suppliers have confirmed impact right in the mobile app. They can see who those suppliers are. There's contact info. And suppliers have the mobile app too if they want to use that to confirm impact for customers. But the beauty is that customers can start actually connecting, collaborating, and messaging suppliers pertaining to that event right from their mobile app itself. So that entire workflow is fairly automated, and there's no need to be sitting in a war room trying to find information and get answers. Shazid, anything to add? This is your baby, so talk about anything that you would have said that I missed.
Yeah, one thing that I'm being asked quite often recently is, yes, Reslink can monitor suppliers and sites, but what about airports? What about ports, border crossings, major roads? So I wanted to highlight that, yes, we do monitor every port in the world. We do monitor every airport in the world. A lot of our customers are using our tool to monitor some major roads. There's a road that comes from a couple of roads that, come from Guadalajara straight into Texas. And a lot of our customers are monitoring those major roads through us. Border crossings, yes, we monitor border crossings as well. Then we are also asked about what about the companies and sites that we have not mapped? Do you monitor them? Yes, we do monitor them. We monitor every supplier site, every vertical that is potentially serving into your supply chain. It doesn't matter you have mapped it or not, we will still keep you informed about that. One thing I'll add on the mobile side, the most recent feature that we added, the collaboration, it's just amazing. You can tag people, you can add people, you can remove people, you can talk to your suppliers, you can talk to your internal teams directly from mobile, and it's not email, it's instant messaging. You can just type a message and receive a response next second.
Shazid, there was one question for you. I think you can answer, which was how were the categories of low, medium, and severe event determined? How does your
Sure,
team?
sure. I'll answer that question with 2 examples. Example number 1, an earthquake happens in Indonesia. Resilink creates a geofencing around the epicenter, and there are no sites mapped. Maybe it's a remote region in Indonesia. Would Resilink notify you about that? Yes, Resilink will still keep you informed because the country is Indonesia. We don't want you to jump into Google and do that research and go into your Excels and War Room. We will let you know that, yes, this earthquake happened, but there are no sites in that region. We will class it, or we will categorize it as low because there are no sites. It's low potential. Now, if an earthquake happens in Indonesia and there are supplier sites mapped, it will be a medium. If an earthquake happens in Indonesia and there are sites mapped and we are also observing disruptions, or the magnitude is really high and it's not a very deep earthquake, means there will definitely be disruptions. It can jump to high, and then it can also, we have not seen an earthquake of severe magnitude yet, but yes, if an earthquake of let's say 8.2 happens and it's only 1 or 2 miles deep and it's happening in southern Taiwan, yes, the entire world will be affected and it will be a severe earthquake. Now, another example is where a supplier, let's say a supplier, a company that makes packaging for almost all industries, files for bankruptcy. It's not mapped on Resilink platform yet. It is possible that we are in the process of mapping it. It is possible that customers will provide that company maybe next year. But if it's not mapped, we will gauge it as low. If that company is mapped, it's a supplier on Resilink platform, it will be medium. If there are immediate disruptions, it can be high. So that's our very basic criteria. We are trying to fit this one mechanism, around 100 and plus customer companies. So that's why we kept it very basic. And then customers can go in and update it on their mobile app if it's severe for them and Resilink gauge it as medium, you can always update it.
Thank you, Shaz. Okay, so quickly moving to just a quick, one thing I will say, coronavirus even was unprecedented for Resilink, even though we've been in the supply chain disruption business for 10 years. One of the things that we saw that was very different about COVID was that it was a global disruption. We normally see disruptions that are fairly, localized. It's a hurricane, it's flooding, it's a region of the world, it's a city, it's a local site. But this is a disruption that sort of grew in scale and over time became worse, and then it's moving still, right? We are seeing things that emerge as we just talked about in Malaysia, Philippines, etc. So one of the things we did for our customers was created a COVID dashboard so that all the different war rooms that we had in the system for all the different COVID related restrictions, lockdowns, shutdowns, travel issues, etc., customers could manage the suppliers, impact confirmations, and everything in a single place. And then with Collaboration Center, we were able to give customers the ability not only to collaborate with each other in a Teams-like environment where they could collaborate for COVID or specifically for a given event, or they could collaborate for a specific type of supplier assessment or a workflow. Let's say a commodity manager is working on hey, I'm trying to find another site and qualify it. They can open a workflow with the supplier and collaborate and send messaging and documents and things like that through the Resilink system itself. Now, there was one question that actually came up that I think this slide does answer that question, which was, how do major companies, following responsible supply chain practices, how are they aligning along the dimension of responsible supply chain along with resilience and risk management? This talks a little bit about that. One of the things Resilink does for our customers is and as I said, we've been monitoring events for 10 years. So what we've done in the process is we created this massive big data repository that has tons of supplier related disruptions and events and news and things like that for the last 10 years. So many companies reached out to us to get supplier intelligence and research about COVID-19 related disruptions, delays, etc. But more importantly, as they go forward and select suppliers in their supply chain, or they want to go look up, hey, what has this supplier been through? Have there been lawsuits, citations, negative media coverage, any kind of child labor violations of environmental regulations, fines that a government agency like an FDA or FAA might, like an airworthiness directive issued against one of their products. Cyber attacks and hacks, any safety or security problems, as well as, of course, all the leadership changes, M&A type things, profit warnings like price fluctuations, fines, and things like that. Resilink has a ton of data on more than 100,000 suppliers and companies across multiple tiers in the supply chain. So if you're interested, talk to us. You don't actually have to be a Resilink customer in order to get some of these reports. And so yeah, so to contact us. But this is really what we see. We definitely see this as become a lot more emphasis has been placed on doing supplier screening and investigation in the post-COVID world, and the number of requests have been exponentially higher for us. Another thing that we see has grown quite a lot is the need for assessing suppliers and measuring supplier performance along many different dimensions. And one big change we see is business continuity. Now, Reslink's obviously always been in the supply chain mapping space, so very consistent supply chain mapping across multiple industries. But business continuity, pandemic readiness were two assessments that we definitely saw a lot of customers start to kick off since January. So we see tremendous increase in companies wishing to ask suppliers to do mapping, monitoring, and you can see a little bit of an industry-wide view. I mean, high tech has always been all over this. You know, high tech industry has been through from 2001 being that big wake-up call with the Japan earthquake and tsunami. This industry has been extremely, you know, risk sensitive, I should say. And we continue to see that even today. But what's really interesting is life science industry we see has become a very key mapper, I should say. And business continuity also has grown in focus for the life science industry post-COVID. So let's see, I think we have maybe one or two additional slides, and I'm gonna check up what questions we have as well as we go. So one quick thing is, you know, workflows. So this is playbooks. You know, we see our customers creating playbooks for and assigning action items, setting priority budgets and things like that for things like find another source, or, you know, qualify another site, and collaborating and so on with suppliers. But where we're going with our capabilities is really moving more into predicting PO delivery delays. And like I said, you know, by next year, Redlink will be predicting lead time, pricing type things. Today, we're very focused on the end-tier supply chain mapping, the part site mapping, and the PO predictive machine learning project that we have currently done has been incredibly successful. So our focus is to continue to be predictive using neural network and deep learning type technologies for predicting price fluctuations. We actually started working on this with about, I think, Shazid, 30 commodities that we're doing with high tech right now? What do you, off the top of your head, do you remember some of the ones that we've built the neural network for?
Yeah, these are 30 commodities, but you know, these are metals. We've also incorporated some industrial gases, some rare earth minerals, by products of petroleum. So not just high tech, but you know, they connect to almost all other industries.
Great. I think one other question was, do you also monitor global recalls? And yes, we do. In fact, if you, once we send you the slides, by the way, we'd be happy to send you the newsletter that I was sharing after this as well. But yes, we do monitor healthcare, all industries we cover, we monitor recalls that are announced. So I think with that, we covered quite a few of the questions that came in. I think one question was shipping lanes, around shipping lanes and transportation monitoring. What we do that is in Reslink here is we really focus monitoring on all the warehouse, DC, locations, any kind of cross-docking facilities, ports and airports, and any other logistics nodes. So our focus is on node monitoring heavily, but at the purchase order level, because ResLink has the 10 years of event history, we have been able to establish causal inference using machine learning to say, if we look at your, let's say, 3 years of PO history data, combine that with our 3 years or 4 years of event watch history data, and we can then predict when the supplier will be late in their delivery. How we do that is because our data shows that 3 years ago, there was a earthquake in Japan. Supplier had a site there, and 2 months later, they decommitted on their POs, or their deliveries were pushed out. So the three things our PO predictive model predicts. One is which suppliers are most at risk, which POs are most at risk, how soon before the disruption might manifest, or the PO delivery delay might manifest, and how long might the delay be. Now, this is absolutely critical, because as a supply chain practitioner, if I know that my supplier is at risk of delivering late, I might adjust. I'll be able to adjust my lead time ahead of time and preempt that delivery delay by having correct and accurate lead times in the system, so my PO gets kicked off to that supplier at the right time. So this is a very transformational kind of initiative. I think it's cutting edge, and only ResLink can do this because we have the 10 years of history to leverage. Another question was, do you see part shortages across industries? Shazid, do you want to chime in on this one, and then I can add after?
Yeah, sure. We are still seeing shortages, especially on the healthcare side. These suppliers that make these PPEs, they are running on 100% capacity, and demand keeps increasing. In this situation, you cannot really find new supply as well. So the supplier is still the same. Demand keeps increasing. Suppliers running at 100% capacity. Governments are implementing restrictions. For example, you can have only 50% of the labor. You cannot hire new foreign labor. So we should really keep an eye. It doesn't matter if you're not in healthcare, you will still need this PPE, and to be able to keep your business running. So I would especially keep an eye on that sector. Then a lot of businesses that were shut down faced financial challenges as well. We realized at a later point that their products were actually somehow connecting to something essential, some essential business, but that supply has been already lost because of suppliers struggling. So we should keep an eye on financial health of the suppliers as well. Shortages, yes, there are a lot of recalls in the PPE itself as well. Then there are other regular recalls. I know automotive industry, there's a demand impact there, so we are not seeing many recalls on that side, but there are recalls still happening in other industries, labeling, packaging, ingredients, commodities. There's a recall recently, I think it affected my family as well, but there's a recall on onions in the US, which will affect the food and beverages. So such recalls are still happening.
And then thanks, Shaz. And then as we also discussed, we do see sporadic capacity problems that are continuously happening, that do cause part shortages, that cause customers and companies in general to have to scramble all of a sudden because one of their suppliers suddenly found a burst of cases, employees testing positive, and ended up having to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we see those types of things cause part shortages and capacity problems for sure. Another question was, how can ResLink help with supplier health in the current environment? Yeah, so thank you for that question. We see that there are a couple of things that ResLink actually does working with suppliers for free when we have customers who subscribe to our mapping and assessment solution. The first thing is, as you saw on that mobile app slide, we alert our customers about the events that are happening, but we also alert the supplier and say, hey, supplier, this event about your company or your site just hit public domain. Are you okay? Yes or no? A lot of times what happens, especially with some large companies, supplier may not even be aware that they have a site in a flood zone somewhere in Vietnam or Malaysia or Thailand or whatever, right? So we are helping suppliers be alerted about this event at exactly the same time that we alerted customers. And the supplier now has time before the customer processes this to go figure out how does this affect their operations. That's number one. Number two is we have a resiliency score that we create for every supplier on our platform, which we do provide to the suppliers free of charge. It gives them how their supply chain resiliency is scored. Think of it as like a DNB score, but for supply chain resilience, you know, and we're looking at the supplier's global site network, their business continuity, their performance scores from across our customers, their supply chain risk maturity elements, and providing them this score. So it tells them how they score, how they compare to other companies in the benchmark, what is the industry average for their vertical, and what is the best in class score. So that this gives them a little bit of information. And then they're certainly welcome to come and ask us for additional diagnostics reports that could allow them to say, is it network resiliency where they lag, or is it performance score where they lag, etc.
One thing I'll
Yeah,
add,
go ahead.
small but still important. All the events that we notify during the week, we share the weekly newsletter with the suppliers as well. So just to keep them informed that what is happening in the supply chain world. Suppliers receive this weekly newsletter for free every Friday.
Thank you, Shazib. Yeah, so as you saw, one weekly newsletter is so many different, about 7 or 8 events a day, actually. So we're making suppliers aware. You know, one of the things we didn't have slides on today, it's we have a maturity model for supply chain resilience. It goes from being reactive to aware to proactive to integrated to resilient. It's not something you're going to get to in a 6-month project. Resiliency is a journey. It takes multiple years. You can buy some tools and data and technology, but there are people, process type of change management things, making sure processes are there, incentives are aligned to be a more resilient company. And ResLink has created, for the data and visibility piece, the people and process and incentives piece, all the steps along the way in order to get from reactive to resilient. And by at least making suppliers aware of disruptions, and keeping them in the loop on all the things that are going on in the industry through the newsletter, and giving them a rating of how their resilience compares with others in the industry, we're moving them from being reactive to being aware on the maturity model. Another quick, I think we have time for maybe one last question before we have to end. And it was around how are customers using Commodity Watch to get price reductions and price prediction. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll let Shazib chime in with more. Really, what Commodity Watch is, and we're building the neural networks, working with several customers in the high-tech industry right now. But basically what we're doing is looking at seemingly unrelated news and developments that might be happening in the world of the internet, across the internet, and establishing pattern recognition technology to say, you know what, every time there is a stock market crash in the US, or the stock market goes down in the US and India has a good monsoon, gold price goes up, right? Or right now, these are three things that are happening that are causing helium prices to go down. So we're able to give our customers who are monitoring these commodities these types of price movements, and then they then can use that information in negotiations with their suppliers. And all the time, the world is not perfect, so many a time the prices are actually going up. I mean, gold certainly hit record levels this year. So prices can go up or down by commodity, by situation. The good thing is we're able to predict what the directional change is, so our customers can leverage it for their categories. Shazib, any final thoughts on this one before we end for today?
Yeah, I'll take one more question as well after this, but you've covered almost everything about Commodity Watch. There are a lot of factors that influence commodities and different grades of commodities. We are actually able to process around 100 variables, and based on those variables, we are able to predict what's going to happen in a commodity market in next 10 days, 30 days, 60 days. That's what Commodity Watch is. Last question, I'll take it quickly. Can our platform track warnings as well? Yes, we do track warnings. Different agencies like FDA, they inspect facilities, they send warnings, they send their insights to these manufacturers, and we do monitor that. And we keep our customers informed on what's going on.
Thank you, Shazib. So I think with that, we are officially out of time. If you did have questions that we didn't get to, we will get to them and emailed responses to you by end of day. Thank you again for attending. Wish you all the best, your families, your teams, and everyone. Best wishes for COVID and beyond from all of us here at Resolink. Thank you.